October 28, 1944, Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. Transport truck kicked up dust as it rolled through the gates. Clara Weiss sat in the back with 62 other German women gripping the bench so hard her knuckles went white. They'd been traveling for 3 weeks. Ship across the Atlantic, train across America, and now this a prison camp in the middle of a Louisiana swamp. Truck stopped. American voices shouted orders in English she could barely understand. Out, line up, single file. The women stumbled onto the dirt compound. Clara's legs barely held her. 3 weeks of sitting, of fear, of wondering what came next. An American sergeant walked down the line. He was tall, 30s. German accent when he spoke, but wrong somehow. Too American, too smooth. He held a clipboard reading names, matching faces to files. Bauman, Greta Fisher, Anna Weiss. Clara, that voice. She looked up. The clipboard fell. Michael Weiss, her husband, the man she married in Stuttgart in 1932, the man who left Germany in 1938 and begged her to come with him. The man she refused stood 3 feet away wearing an American uniform, sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His name tag read Weiss. One and removed Americanicity. Stared at each other. 3 seconds, 6 seconds. His eyes moved over her facethe, hollowed cheeks, the gray-streaked hair cut short, the prison number pinned to her coach. Watched him process it, watched him scan her features like he was looking for something familiar, and then nothing. He bent down, picked up the clipboard, cleared his throat. Weiss. Clara, Barracks 4. He moved to the next woman, didn't recognize her. The man she'd shared a bed with for 6 years, whose child she'd lost in 1936, who knew the scar above her right eyebrow from a bicycle accident when she was 9. He looked at her face and saw a stranger. Michael Weiss had processed 847 German prisoners since June. Most days it was routine. Read the names, match the faces, send them to their assigned barracks. The men were easier. They arrived angry or defeated, but never surprising. Soldiers looked like soldiers. Women were different. They arrived broken, terrified, expecting brutality that never come. This group, 63 women captured in France, looked like survivors of something worse than war. Michael read down the list. Weiss. Clara. He froze. His wife's name, his dead wife's name. He looked up at the prisoner standing in front of him. 30s, thin nose, skeletal gray streaking through dark hair, eyes that stared at him with an intensity that made his chest tight. For a moment, something flickered in his memory, the shape of her face, the way she held her shoulders. But no, Clara died in Stuttgart in 1943. He'd received the telegram, neighborhood destroyed in Allied bombing. No survivors. This woman just had the same name. Weiss was common enough. He picked up the clipboard he'd dropped and moved on, but that night, lying in his bunk, he couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes had known him. You're probably wondering if he ever figures it out. He does, but not for 3 more weeks, and when it happens it's because of one word, one single German word. She says, without thinking, here's the question this story asks: if the person you loved most in the world looked right at you and didn't recognize you, would you tell them who you are? Lara had to answer that question every single day for 3 weeks. And what she decided would happen when he finally figured it out, that's what the next 39 minutes are about. Stay with me on this one. Barracks 4 smelled like wood and disinfectant. 24 women assigned to the long room, metal bunks, thin mattresses, single window at each end. Clara took the bunk near the back. No one spoke to her that first night. She didn't sleep. She lay on her back staring at the wooden slats above her, replaying the moment over and over. Didn't recognize her. 6 years, that's all it had been. 6 years since she'd stood on the platform at Berlin's Anhalter station and watched his train pull away. Berlin, September 5, 10th, 1938. Michael had packed 2 suitcases. Everything he owned fit inside them. Come with me, he'd said for the 100th time. Clara, please, I see what's coming. Germany is going somewhere terribly. This is our home, she'd replied. I'm not running because you're afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm certain. Then go, but I'm staying. Looked at her for a long time, waiting for her to change her mind. She didn't. The train whistle blew. Hugh picked up his suitcases and walked toward the platform. She called after him. Michael turned. Don't forget me. He smiled, sad, broken. Never then. He was gone, and now here She was a prisoner in his camp and he'd looked at her face and seen nothing one of the other women. Older Mabe 50 whispered across the dark barracks. You knew one of the guards. Clara stiffened. I saw how you looked at him and how he looked at you. You're mistaken. I've been married 30 years. I know what that look means. Clara didn't answer. The woman tried again. Is he? He's no one. Clara interrupted. Just a face that reminded me of someone who Simeon I used to know. The woman let it drop, but lying there in the dark, Clara touched the scar above her right eyebrow, the one Michael used to kiss before they fell asleep, memorized every part of her body once. Now he couldn't even recognize her face. Clara hadn't told Michael the truth that day at the train station. She didn't stay in Germany because of pride or patriotism. She stayed because of Rebecca Adler, the Jewish woman who lived in the apartment below theirs, whose daughter Sarah was 9 years old and terrified of the men in brown shirts. 2 weeks before Michael left, Rebecca had knocked on their door at midnight. They're making lists. She'd whispered, me husband's name is on it. We need papers. We need a way out. Michael had wanted to help, but he also wanted to leave. Clara had seen the fear in Sarah's eyes. I'll stay, she told Michael. Someone has to. Clara, you go get us a place in America. You'll finish this and follow. But she never followed because after Rebecca's family there was another family and another, and by the time Clara realized she couldn't leave, Michael was already gone. Between 1938 and 1942, Clara helped 37 Jewish families escape Germany. She forged papers. She made contacts. She smuggled people to safe houses in Switzerland and France, until someone informed on the network. Until the Gestapo came to her door at 3 in the morning. Until she ran. That's how she ended up in France. That's how she got captured. That's how she ended up here in Louisiana, in a prison camp, staring at the husband who thought she was dead. She'd stayed to save lives, and now he'd never know. In the guards' barracks, Michael sat on his bunk with a letter half written, the same letter he'd been trying to write for 3 days. Dear Emily, it began. Emily Weiss, his wife, his American wife, the woman he married in 1943. After the telegram came from Stuttgart saying Clara was dead, he stared at the blank space. After Dear Emily, and couldn't think of what to say, because for 3 nights now he'd been dreaming about Clara, the real Clara, his first wife. Not the way she'd looked at the train station in 1938, but the way she'd looked on their wedding day, June 12, 1932, Stuttgart. A small church. Her dress was cream-colored because white was too expensive. She'd worn flowers in her hair. He could still remember the exact moment he'd seen her walking down the aisle, the way his breath had caught, the way he'd thought, this is the woman I'll grow old with. But they didn't grow old together. Had left. She'd stayed, and the war had swallowed her. Holy, his bunkmate Corporal Miller walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, still writing that letter. Can't focus, Emily, expecting you to write more often. Oh, she knows I'm busy. Miller handed him one of the cups. Then what's eating you? Michael didn't answer right away. He took a sip of the coffee. Bitter army issue, terrible. Finally he said, one of the new prisoners, German woman, same name as my first wife, Weizia, common name I know, but for a second, when I saw her face, you thought it was her. No, it's not. Clara died in 1943. Stuttgart bombing. I got the telegram. Then what's the problem? Michael rubbed his eyes. I don't know something about her. The way she looked at me, like she knew me. Miller shrugged. Probably just recognized you as German American. You know how they get, hoping for special treatment base. You speak the language maybe, but Michael didn't believe that. Because when that woman, that prisoner named Clara Weiss, had looked at him, it wasn't hope in her eyes, it was grief. Michael set down the coffee cup and pulled a box from under his bunk. It was small, metal, locked with a tiny key he wore on a chain around his neck. He opened it. Inside were the things he'd kept from his old life: a photograph of his parents' German passport stamped with the eagle and swastika he'd renounced, and one more photograph, fold Edward, at the edges, his wedding photo, June 1932, him in a borrowed suit, Clara in her cream-colored dress. He unfolded it, carefully looked at her face, young, smiling, alive. He told himself for years that keeping this photo was about honoring her memory, but the truth was simpler and worse. He'd never let her Go even when the telegram came, even when the American chaplain had told him you're free to remarry, now she's gonna have to move forward, even when he'd met Emily, kind, beautiful Amelia, nurse at the base hospital in Georgia, even when he'd proposed, even when they'd married in a small ceremony in Atlanta, even then he'd kept this photograph hidden under his bunk, a secret from his new wifey, a betrayal of both women, because part of him had never believed Clara was really dead. Part of him always thought she'd walk through a door somewhere, somehow, and prove the telegram wrong. And now a prisoner with her name and her eyes had shown up in his camp, and he didn't know what that meant, but it terrified him. Miller watched him stare at the photograph. That her, your first wifey, yeah, pretty, she was Emily. No, you kept that. Michael carefully folded the photo and put it back in the box. No, you planning to tell her? No, Miller didn't push it. Instead, he said, the new prisoner, the one with the same name. You want me to handle her processing? I can take over as translator for Barracks 4. If it's no, Michael said quickly, I'll handle it, because even though he knew it wasn't her, even though he knew Clara was dead, couldn't shake the need to look at that prisoner's face again, to prove to himself that she was a stranger, maybe to prove that she was in mourning. Came early at Camp Claiborne. Bell rang at 6, roll call at 6:30, breakfast at 7. Clara stood in line with the other women from Barracks 4, waiting. As the guards counted them, she kept her eyes down, kept her face blank, but she knew the moment Michael walked into the compound, she could feel it. The air changed. He moved down the line with his clipboard, counting, getting closer. She could hear his boots on the dirt, could hear him speaking to the other guards in English, casual, confident American. He stopped in front of her. Wacy looked up, met his eyes for just a second, then looked down again. Yes, medical check this morning, report to the infirmary after breakfast. Yesh moved on, didn't pause, didn't hesitate. The woman next to her, older one from last night, whispered he didn't recognize you. Clara said nothing. How is that possible? You said you used to know him. I said he reminded me of someone. That's not the same thing. Clara turned to her. What's your name? Margaret. Margaret Klein. Margaret Klein. Margaret, please stop asking questions. Margaret studied her face for a long moment, then quietly, you're protecting him. I'm protecting myself. No, you're protecting him, because if you're who I think you arraigned, he doesn't remember. You then revealing yourself only hurts you, but you're not doing it, which means you care more about what happens to him than what happens to you. Clara closed her eyes. You're wrong. I've been a wife for 30 years. I'm not wrong. Roll call ended. The women filed toward the mess hall. Clara walked in silence, Margaret beside her. Finally, Margaret said, what did you do that made him leave? I stayed in Germany. Yes, we. Clara didn't answer. Because how could she explain? How could she tell this stranger that she'd chosen 37 Jewish families over her own marriage, that she'd forged papers and smuggled children and lied to the Gestapo because someone had taught that she'd believed Michael would understand if she could just explain it to him someday? But now he didn't even recognize her face, and maybe that was better. Maybe it was easier this way. Mess hall was loud, trays clattering, women talking in low voices, guards standing along the walls. Clara took her tray and sat at the end of a table. Underneath food was American strange bacon, thick fatty strips she'd never seen in German, eggs that weren't powdered, bread that was soft, and white coffee that smelled real. She ate slowly, mechanically, not tasting it, just forcing it down because she needed to survive. Survival meant eating. Across the mess hall, she could see Michael stood near the serving line talking to another guard, laughing at something. Easy, relaxed, had built a new life. That much was obvious. He wasn't the man who'd left Germany in 1938. Desperate and uncertain, he was American now, confident, comfortable. She was just a ghost from a past he'd buried. Margaret sat down across from here. You should eat more. I'm eating. You're moving food around your tray. That's not the same thing. Clara forced down another bite of bacon. It was too salty too. Rich wanted to spit it out, but she swallowed instead. What happened to your husband? Clara asked. You said you'd been married 30 years. Where is he? Margaret's face went still. Dead. Russia, 1942. I'm sorry, don't be. He was a good man once, then the party changed him. Be the end. I didn't recognize him anymore. They sat in silence for a moment, then Margaret said, if your husband is here alive wearing that uniform, you have something I'll never have again. the chance to be known by someone. Who knew Yaub for all this? He doesn't know me, then make him. Remember why? What good does it do? Margaret leaned forward because being forgotten is worse than being dead. Trust me, I know. If medical check was routine and nurse took Clara's temperature, her lungs, looked for signs of illness or injury. Standard procedure for new air valves. But while Clara sat in the infirmary waiting area, she saw something that made her blood go cold. A woman walked in, American, young, maybe 28, dark hair pulled back and a neat Buno wedding ring on her left hand. She was carrying a basket of laundry clean uniforms pressed and folded. She smiled at the nurse behind the desk. Is Michael around? He forgot his extra shirts this morning. The nurse laughed. Sergeant Wise? Yeah, he's in the supply room down the hall, third door. Thanks. The woman walked past Clara without looking at her. Down the hall, third door. Knocked. Michael. Its meth door opened. Michael stood there, and when he saw the woman, his whole face changed, softened, smiled in a way Clara hadn't seen since 1938. Emily, you didn't have to come all the way out here. I know, but you need clean shirts, and I was in town anyway. He took the basket, kissed her on the forehead. Thank you. How's your day going? Same as always. Processed a new group yesterday. Should be a quiet few weeks. Now Emily touched his face. You look tired. I'm fine. You're not sleeping well. I'm fine, he repeated, but gentler this time. I promise. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then okay, I'll see you tonight. 6 o'clock. I'll be home. She kissed him, brief, casual, married, and left. Clara sat frozen in the waiting area. She'd stopped breathing. Michael was married to an American woman, a woman he called home. He'd moved on, completely built a new life on the assumption that she was deadened. She was dead to him, dead to the world, just a ghost sitting in an infirmary waiting room watching the man she'd married kiss someone else. The nurse called her name. Wise, you are clear. You can go. Clara stood on legs that didn't feel like her own, walked out of the infirmary, past the supply room, where Michael was probably still standing, holding a basket of clean shirts from his wife. She made it back to the barracks bare. She collapsed on her bunk and let herself cry for the first time since her capture. Michael couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, glistening to the sounds of the camp settling around him. Crickets, distant voices, low hum of the generator. Emily had noticed something was wrong. She always did, but how could he explain it? How could he tell her that a German prisoner had the same name as his first wife, and the same eyes, and the same way of holding her shoulder? She stood. How could he tell her that he'd been dreaming about Clara every night since that prisoner arrived? How could he tell her that he'd pulled out that old wedding photograph 3 times today just to compare face? And he still couldn't be sure. He couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, would make it a betrayal of Emily, would mean admitting that he'd never fully let go of Clara. Corporal Miller rolled over in the next bunk. You awake? Ya still thinking about that prisoner? No, liar. Michael sighed. What do you want me to say, Miller? I want you to say what you're thinking, because whatever it is, it's eating you alive. Michael was quiet for a long time. Then, what if she's not dead? Whoa, Clara, my first wife. What if the telegram was wrong? What if she survived the bombing? Michael, I know it sounds crazy, but the telegram came from the city administration, just a list of casualties. They weren't doing DNA tests or checking bodies carefully. It was chaos. What if they got it wrong, and you think this prisoner is Harry? Don't know, maybe I can't tell. Miller sat up. Okay, let's say she is. Let's say that prisoner is your first wife. What then? What do you mean? I mean, what are you going to do? You're married to Emily. You've been married for 2 years. You're about to have a kid with her. You can't just. I know to you, because if you go to that prisoner and say, hey, are you my dead wife? And she says yes, then what? You leave Emily. You tell her sorry. Turns out my first marriage is still valid, so we were never really married. Michael closed his eyes. I don't know. Then maybe you shouldn't ask the question. What, Mabe? You should just let it be. Let that prisoner be a stranger named Clara Waiswool, happens to look a little bit like someone you used to know, and you move on with your life with Emily and your kid. That's not fair to Clara. Which one, the prisoner or your first wife? Because if they're not the same person, you're creating a problem that doesn't exist. And if they are the same person, she's been in this camp for 3 days and hasn't said Anything which means maybe she doesn't want you to know. Michael opened his eyes, stared at the ceiling. Miller was right. If that prisoner was Clara, his Clara, she would have said something. She would have identified herself, demanded to see him, made a scene. Fact that she stayed silent meant one of two things: either she wasn't his wife, or she wasn't. She'd chosen not to tell him. Either way, the message was clear. She didn't want to be known, and maybe that was his answer. 3 weeks passed. October turned into November. Louisiana heat finally broke, replaced by cool mornings and mild afternoons. Clara settled into camp routine. She worked in the laundry, scrubbing uniforms in industrial sinks, hanging them to dry in the sun. The work was hard, but it was honest and it kept her hands busy. She saw Michael every day at roll caldering meal distribution. Walking past the laundry building, he never looked directly at her, never spoke to her unless he had to, and slowly, painfully, she started to accept it. This was her life. Now, watching her husband from a distance, watching him build a life with someone else, Esh learned Emily was pregnant, heard it from other prisoners who worked in the base clinics. 7 months along, due in March. Michael was going to be a father, and Clara would never see that child, would never meet her, would never be part of that life. But that was okay. It had to be okay because she'd made her choice in 1938 when she stayed in Germany. She'd chosen the people who needed her over the man who loved her, and no had chosen the woman who was there for him over the ghost of the woman who wasn't. It was fair. It was right. It was the only way forward. Margaret noticed the change in her. You've given up. I've accepted reality. That's the same thing though. Giving up means I wanted something different. Reality means I understand this is how it has to be. You don't think you deserve to tell him the truth. I don't think it matters whether I deserve it or not. He's married. He's about to have a child. What good does my truth do? It just destroys his life. Margaret shook her head. You're wrong, but I understand. They worked in silence for a while. Then Clara said, what would you do if your husband was here, alive, but didn't recognize you? Would you tell him? Margaret thought about it. Because I'd want him to know that I still existed, that I was still here, but my husband is dead, so maybe my answer doesn't count. It counts. Then here's my real answer. Where are you? Don't tell him for him, you tell him for you, because carrying this alone will break you. But Clara didn't tell him. She carried it, and some days she thought Margaret was right. Some days the weight of it felt like it would crush her, but she carried it anyway. Happened on a Tuesday morning in late November. Clara was working in the laundry room, scrubbing a stack of work shirts. The water was hot. Her hands were washed. Been at it for 3 hours. She pulled one of the shirts from the water, wrung it out, and the fabric slipped from her hands and fell onto the concrete floor there, damped. The word came out automatically, a curse, specific German, but not just any German. It was a Stuttgart phrase, regional distinctive, and it was the exact phrase she used to say when she dropped things, the exact inflection, exact exasperation. She froze because Michael was standing in the doorway, had come to drop off another load of uniforms, had been standing there for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to hear, long enough to remember. Their eyes met for the first time in 3 weeks. Really looked at her, not past her, not through her, at Hirsch. Watched him process it, watched the recognition start to dawn. His face went white. The basket of uniforms fell from his hands. Clara, her name, her real name, not Weiss or prisoner or you, her name. She didn't answer or couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up completely. He took a step closer. Clara, my God, Clara. She shook her head, started backing toward the far wall. No, you're mistaken. My name is Clara Weiss, born April 12th, 1910, Stuttgart. We got married in June 1932 at St. Michael's Church. You wore a cream-colored dress because white was too expensive. You had flowers in your hair, daisies. She couldn't breathe the night before our wedding. You told me you were afraid you wouldn't be a good wife, afraid you'd disappoint me, and I told you that was impossible, that you were already everything I'd ever wanted. Tears started down her face. You have a scar above your right eyebrow from when you were 9 years old. Bicycle accident. Your brother was teaching you to ride without hands, and you crashed into a fence. Post 6 stitches. Michael, I thought you were dead. The telegram said. I know what it said. Then why didn't you tell me? 3 weeks. Clara, 3 weeks you've been here, and you didn't say anything. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Beckhouse You didn't recognize me, and I thought that was my answer, that 6 years had changed me so much that even you couldn't see me anymore, and if you couldn't see me then, maybe I was already gone, already dead, and you'd moved on, and I had no right to what to come back into your life and ruin it. Michael stared at her. Ruin it? You're married, Michael. I saw her, the woman with the laundry basket. Emily, your wifey, looked like she'd hit him. I saw you kiss her. I heard you tell her you'd be home by 6. You have a life here, a good life, and I'm a ghost from a past you buried. I have no right to dig it back up. You think I buried. You didn't. I tried, God, I tried, but I couldn't. I kept that wedding photo. I kept it hidden under my bunk. I look at it some nights when I can't sleep. Emily doesn't know. She thinks you're just a sad memory I've moved past, but I haven't. He never did. Clara closed her eyes. You should have. Why, Becca? I'm not that woman anymore. The one in the photograph. That woman was young and stupid and believed she could save everyone. This woman, the one standing in front of you, couldn't even save herself. What happened to you? They couldn't talk in the laundry room. Too many people, too much risk of being overheard. So Michael used his authority as a translator, requested a private interrogation room, standard procedure for clarifying prisoner records, told the supervising officer the woman's file had discrepancy, needed to verify her identity. The officer signed off without question. 30 minutes later, Clara sat across from Michael in a small concrete room, a table between them, 2 chairs, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. This should have felt like an interrogation, but it didn't. It felt like sitting across from a stranger. Whoa, used to be the person who knew her better than anyone. Michael pulled out her filia pendant. Read through the pages. Clara Weiss, age 34, captured October 15th, 1944, near Cannes, France, traveling under false papers. Occupation, listed as Secretary, Reich, Maine. Security Office. He looked up Reich, Maine Security Office. The RSH. AO worked for them, not by choice. There's always a choice. Another really isn't. Not when they have a gun to your head. Michael set down the file. Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning, from the day I left. So she told him. She told him about Miriam Keller, about the 37 families, about the network of safe houses and forged papers, and midnight escapes. I stayed because someone had to. She said you were right. Germany was going somewhere terrible, but I couldn't just leave knowing what was coming. I had to try to help. Why didn't you tell me? I would have helped, I know, but I also knew you needed to leave. You're Jewish enough. Michael, own Jewish grandparent. That's all it takes. If you'd stayed, I would have been careful. There is no careful in Germany anymore. You know that. He did know that. That's why he'd left. She continued. I helped people escape for 4 years, 1938 to 1942. And then someone informed on us. Gestapo came for the whole network. Most of us got away. Went underground. I got false papers, different name, different history, and the job at the RSHA. That was later, 1943. I needed papers that would stand up to serious scrutiny. So I made a deal with someone, I won't say who because they might still be Alevian. I won't risk their life even now. What kind of deal? I would work at the RSHA as a file clerk, low level, nothing important, and in exchange I'd get perfect papers that said I'd been vetted and cleared, papers that would let me move around without suspicion. You worked for the people hunting you. I hid in plain sight, and I stole files, names of Jews who'd been arrested, locations of deportation trains, anything I could pass to people who could use it. Michael ran his hands through his hair. Jesus, Clara, if they'd caught you, they didn't, but they could have. AO could have been shot or sent to a camp, or I know, but I wasn't. He was careful. Then how did you end up in Franceschi? Was quiet for a moment. Someone at the RSHA figured it out, started asking questions. I had maybe 24 hours before they arrested me, so I ran, got out of Berlin, made it to France. I was trying to reach Switzerland, but you got caught. Yes, British forces. Near Cannes. They thought I was just another refugee, processed me as a POW because I had German papers. And here I am. Michael stared at her. You weren't a Nazi, no, you were resistance. Yes, and you risked your life for 4 years to save people. I tried. Michael, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think you'd married a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't look away. Michael reached across the table, stop, just before touching her hand. I'm so sorry for leaving you. For not being there, for not know, she pulled her hand back. Don't apologize for leaving you. Were right to go. You saved yourself, that's what matters, but I left you behind. I chose to stay behind. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Michael said, I have to tell you something. I already know you're married. You're going to be a father. I know how I saw Emily at the infirmary. I heard you talking. I know everything, Michael, and it's okay. It's been 6 years. You thought I was dead. You had every right to move on, but I didn't really move on. Just I built a new life on top of the old one. And now the foundation is cracking. Then fix it. Choose Emily. Choose your child. Choose the life you've built. And what about you? I'll be fine. I've survived worse than heartbreak. Michael walked out of that interrogation room and straight into a crisis, because if that prisoner was Clara, and she was, there was no doubt anymore, then he was in an impossible position, was married to Emily legally. Married, they'd had a ceremony in 1943, signed a marriage license, built a life together, but he was also married to Clara still. Legally married, they'd never divorced. He'd had her declared dead, but that was based on a telegram that was wrong, which meant his marriage to Emily wasn't valid, which meant the child Emily was carrying wasn't legitimate, which meant everything he'd built for the past 2 years was founded on a mistake. He sat in the guards' barracks that night, head in his hands, trying to figure out what to do. Corporal Reed sat down next to him. You talked to her? Yeah. And it's her? It's Clara. Damn. Yeah, what are you going to do? I have no idea. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then do you still love her? I don't know. I love the woman she was, but that was 6 years ago. We're different people now. Do you love Emily? Yes. God, yes. I love her, and I can't do this to her. I can't tell her that our marriage isn't real, that she's not actually my wife. That then, don't tell her. Michael looked up. What didn't tell her? Keep the secret. Let Clara be a prisoner who happens to have your wife's name. And when the war ends and Clara gets repatriated to Germany, she disappears from your life forever. Clean. Simple. No one gets hurt. Clara gets hurt. Clara is already hurt. You said yourself she's not the same woman. She's been through hell, Mabe. The kindest thing you can do is let her go. Let her rebuild her life in Germany without being tangled up in your mess. That's not fair to her. What is fair? Destroying Emily's life so you can feel like you did the right thing by Clara. That's not fair to anyone. Michael knew Reed was right, but it didn't feel right. Nothing about this felt right. Becca's Clara was his wife, his first wife, the woman he'd promised to grow old with, and now she was asking him to forget her, to choose his new life over their old Annie. And maybe that was the right choice, but it felt like the worst kind of betrayal. Went to her 3 days later, requested another interrogation. This time he told the truth about why I need to talk to prisoner Weiss about her repatriation options. The officer raised an eyebrow. She's got repatriation options. She's resistance. Her file shows she worked against the Nazi regime. That might qualify her for early release or expedited repatriation. It was a stretch, but the officer bought it, so Michael sat across from Clara. Again, same room, same table, same hanging bulb. I've been thinking, said, about us, about what happens next. There's no us, Mike Allegly. There is. We're still married legally. You're married to Emily now legally. I committed bigamy because my first marriage never ended. Clara looked at him steadily. End it. What end it? Divorce me. You have grounds. Abandonment. I stayed in Germany. When you left, that's abandonment. A judge would grant it. I don't want to divorce you. Why not? Because you're my wife. I was your wife 6 years ago, but that woman is gone, Mike. I'm not her anymore. I know you're not, but that doesn't mean it means exactly that you have a good life here, a wife who loves you. A child coming. I'm not going to be the reason you lose that. What if I don't want to lose you? Then you're being selfish. You can't have both of us. You have to choose. I shouldn't have to choose, but you do. That's life. That's war. That's what happens when 6 years pass and people move on. Michael leaned back in his chair. Emily's due in March. I know the baby's a girl. We're naming her. He stopped, looked away. Naming her. What? Clara's air went out of the room. Clara stared at him. You're naming your daughter after me, after my first wife. Yes. Why? Because Emily asked what name mattered most to me, and I told her about you, about how you died in the war, about how I never got to say goodbye, and she said we should honor you. By giving our daughter your name. Michael, she's kind. Clarash is a good person, and she doesn't deserve to have her life destroyed because I found out my first wife didn't actually die. Then don't destroy it. What? Keep the secret. Don't tell her. Let me be a stranger when the war ends. I'll be repatriated to German. You'll never see me again. And your life goes on clean. Simple. That's what Reed said then. Reed is smart. It's a lie. It's mercy. They sat in silence. Finally, Michael said, what will you do in Germany when you go back or build? If there's anything left to rebuild, you'll be alone. I've been alone for 6 years, so manage. I don't want you to be alone. What you want doesn't matter anymore. The words weren't cruel. They were just true, and that made them hurt worse at night. Clara lay in her bunk and made a decision. She would stay silent, would let Michael have his life, and when the war ended she would go back to Germany and disappear. It was the right thing to do, the only thing to do, because she'd learned something in her years with the resistance. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the most you can do for someone is to not be a burden. Michael had a chance at happiness, a real chance, a wife who loved him, a daughter on the way, a future, and she was just a ghost from his past, a reminder of everything he'd lost. Kindest thing she could do was let him forget her again. But the next morning everything changed because Michael walked into the camp commander's office and said, "Sir, I need to request a transfer." A transfer? Why? Personal reasons. That's not specific enough. Sergeant Michael took a deep breath of the prisoners. Clara Weiss, she's my wife, my first wife. I thought she was dead, but she's not, and I can't continue serving here with this conflict of interest. Commander stared at him. You're married to a German prisoner. Was married 6 years ago before I emigrated. Does your current wife know nothing? How is this a conflict of interest? Because I know, and I can't be objective. I need to be transferred to another camp immediately. The commander considered this. Finley, I'll approve the transfer, but you'll need to document your connection to Theprasiner, and you'll need to recommend how her case should be handled. What do you mean? If she has information about resistance activities, she might be useful for post-war tribunals. Need to know what she knows and whether she's willing to cooperate. Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. She's not a war criminal. I didn't say she was, but she worked at the Resha. That makes her a person of interest. She worked there under duress. She was stealing information to help, then should have no problem cooperating with Allied intelligence. If her story checks out, she'll be cleared, might even qualify for early release. Michael nodded slowly. I'll prepare the documentation. 2 days later, Michael stood in front of Clara's barracks at dawn. He'd been transferred to Camp Rust Infective. Immediately he'd leave this afternoon. He'd never see her again, but first he needed to tell her what he'd done. She came out when he called her name, stood on the barracks steps in the early morning light, looking at him with those eyes that had haunted him for 6 years. Being transferred, he said. I know. Gertrude heard the guards talking. I requested it. I told the commander about us, about our marriage. I couldn't keep lying. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, because even if I never see you again, I needed someone to know the truth, that you existed, that you Servavet, that you mattered. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I also documented your resistance work, submitted it to Allied intelligence. They'll want to interview you if your story checks out, and I know it will. You'll be cleared of collaboration charges. Might even qualify for early release. Michael, you deserve to go home, Clara, to rebuild your life, and I want to make sure that happens. What about Emily? I'm going to tell her not everything, but I'm going to tell her that I found out my first wife, Servavet, that I need to get a formal divorce, that I should have done it years ago. She'll hate you maybe, but she deserves the truth, or at least part of it. They stood in silence for a long moment. Finally Clara said, I'm glad you left Germany. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy. I'm glad you survived. Toei love you, Michael. I want you to know that I never stopped, even when I was hiding Gavin, when I thought I'd never see you again. I loved you. Past tense or present tense. I love you. But love isn't enough. Not for this. Michael nodded because she was right. Love wasn't enough to undo 6 years, wasn't enough to erase Emily. And the life they'd built wasn't enough to go back. Goodbye, Clara. Goodbye. Michael, he turned and walked away, didn't look back, because if he looked back, had never leave. And Clara stood on those barrack steps and watched him go, watched him disappear around the corner of the mess hall, watched the last piece of her old life walk out of sight. And then she went incidentally down on her bunk and finally let herself grieve. Michael Hartman was transferred to Camp Ruston in December 1944. He served there until the end of the war. Told Emily the truth, not all of it, but enough that his first wife had survived, that their marriage had never been properly dissolved, that he needed to fix it. Emily was angry and hurt, then eventually understanding they stayed married, legally remarried in 1946. After the divorce from Clara was finalized, their daughter was born in March 1945. They named her Clara as planned. Michael never saw his first wife again. Clara Weiss was repatriated to Germany in June 1945. Her resistance work was documented and verified. She was cleared of all collaboration charges. Returned to Stuttgart, found her old apartment building still standing, damaged but not destroyed. Rebuild her life one day at a time. She never remarried, never had children, ever stopped wondering what would have happened if she'd gotten on that train in 1938. But she also never regretted staying, because 37 families survived. Because of her, 37 families who would have died. That had to mean something. In 1963, Clara received a letter from America, no return address, just 3 words in handwriting she recognized. I remembered. She kept that letter in a box under her bed for the rest of her life. Because some love stories don't end, they just stop being told. Some marriages survive through paperwork and legal documents and the simple fact of once upon a time, and some people carry each other through decades and distance and different lives, connected by 3 words written on a piece of pottery. Remembered, that's all that's enough. Because being remembered, truly remembered by someone who knew you before the world fell apart, that's a kind of love that doesn't need anything else, it just is. And sometimes that's the only happy ending available.